My first caveat, I did go to NYU, I did take the LLM. I have never taken a legal tax course in my life. I can barely fill out my own taxes, so this is why I asked John to do such a fabulous intro. I'm a lawyer with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. We have been around since 1964, fighting for fundamental rights and freedoms. This is the first time a tax issue has come across my desk. I think it is absolutely vital that we're here on this file. And I'll tell you why, but before I get into it, I do want to say I have a really personal connection with this issue. I am one of the US persons. So first, what in these regulations raises privacy concerns? So much. So if you look at how broad these regulations are, we got a sense of what US persons are. US persons, definitely citizens, former green card holders, people who spend time in the United States. Most of them will not know that they're US persons. If the banks are required to report on this, what does that actually look like for Canadians walking into a bank, opening a bank account, trying to get banking services? What does that mandate Canadian banks? What information does that mandate them to collect about Canadians? Now, in Canada, we have privacy laws, pretty good, better than many other jurisdictions, definitely could use improvement. We're seeing all kinds of areas where there is enormous information sharing going on between Canada and other countries. And we know from past instances that when information is shared across borders, it loses all kinds of protection. So obviously the most, the gold star example of how bad things can get is Mahar Arar, right? That was directly a consequence of Canadian officials improperly, without the right caveat, sharing information with the US, which then led directly to his extradition and torture.
So I just start with a little personal information, because if you hear that I'm from Montreal, you already think I'm from another country. I understand. But I was born here in Toronto, and I grew up in London, Ontario. And then I went to the States on a student visa. And then I got married. And I have 2 children. And I have 2 dual citizen children, the poor dears. And when McGill was looking for a tax law professor, I turned to my husband and I said, if McGill does not bring me back to Canada, we are now committing to living in the United States for the rest of our lives, and I'm afraid I can't do it. Can we go back to Can we go to Canada? Back for me, for him. Can we go to Canada? And he, completely ignorant of the entire ramifications of this, agreed. And so here we are. The US, Canada, the UK, Holland, France, Spain, we all have the same problem, and that is a disappearing tax base. The tax base is disappearing into the ether through international planning. We all have this problem where the most capable of contributing to society, those of our most wealthy, asset-rich individuals and companies, are escaping their tax obligations. This is a common theme, and it's reasonable because we all know that there are tax havens, and we all know that there are shady business deals, and we all know now just how deep that goes, HSBC and so on. So the story that forms the context for thinking about FATCA is one I think we could all agree with, and why I think most Americans who look at this are sympathetic. They're saying, wow, the world is engaged in, the wealthy people of the world are engaged in tax evasion. They're running all over the world with stateless income, and no state can control it because every state is subject to the whims of the other states, and as long as there are tax havens, then none of us can control our taxpayers. So we've got to strike back. Now back about 10 years ago, the OECD started looking at this and talking about information exchange and state-to-state cooperation as a means of reining back the rampant, capital flow. All still feels reasonable. Yes, we don't want to introduce income tax systems where only working class people pay. We don't want to have tax systems that rest fully on working classes who earn all their income from wages and spend it all in consumption, and we get them coming and going. We get them coming When they get that income from the wages, we withhold, and we get them going, we tax them again on those same wages when they spend it. The consumption tax, right? A VAT, value-added tax. GST, HST, right? You're all familiar with this. So am I now. Right. So we don't want an income system that hollows out the top and lets them run around the world with no restraints, and necessarily leaves out the bottom because they don't have any resources, and dumps all of the cost of society and liberty and dignity on the working classes. I missed it when you put up your hands about how many duals were in the room. Can you put up your hands again for me? Is it?
Not anymore dual.
Okay, but former dual is bad enough, right? And is anyone like me a single citizenship but other residents, permanent green card? So I'm your only green card holder. Okay. One thing to always keep in mind, and one thing I'm really curious about is whose benefit is this in? Obviously the big four. That's the big constituency that all of you will be working against, because any way they can extract money from you, you know what I mean by the big four, right? The accountants, yeah? Any way they can extract money from you, so much the better. That's like a jobs plan. That's what we really mean by the HIRE plan or the Jobs Act. What we really mean is how do we extract more from, yeah. We've already been betrayed. Canada has been betrayed by her own, well, I should say this on film, by her own mother country, by the Queen herself.
And of course, could any member of the Isaac Brock Society raise their hands, please? Where are you? We are thrilled to have you. Thank you so much. You have been such a source of inspiration to us and in helping us to get the word out and the changes that are occurring around the world. With significant nostalgia, he turned to me and he lamented the loss, and you could probably guess this, of Steve Jobs. He lamented the loss of Johnny Cash. I like to do a bit of singing, and I understood what he meant. And he lamented the loss of Bob Hope, who, of course, was the master of the one-liners. And shaking his head and comparing yesteryear with today, I'll never forget. He said to me, in a nutshell, Dorian, we used to have Steve Jobs, Johnny Cash, and Bob Hope. Today, we have no jobs, no cash, and no hope. With the assistance we've had from this amazing gentleman to my immediate left. And I will say this, without any evasion, equivocation, or mental reservation of any kind, I want you to know that John Richardson, your contributions to our preparation for this have been absolutely indispensable. Can I give John a round of applause? It's been amazing. Here in Canada, we are provincially and nationally engaged in waging all-out warfare against bullying in whatsoever shape or form it may raise its ugly head. If we will not countenance it in terms of our citizens and our children on the Canadian playgrounds, how can we even remotely countenance it on an international level? We now know we cannot rely on the Harper regime to stand on guard for Canadian sovereignty. Thanks to this current regime that we are now subjected to in this great nation, China now controls a portion of the Canadian oil sands that is approximately the size of Prince Edward Island.
And this is why Canada becomes so crucial here. Because if Canada turns around and says, no, we're not going to sign an IGA with the U.S. We're not going to allow FATCA to be enforced here in the U.S. And there are remedies we have if you try to enforce it on our institutions, and we can talk about some of those. This throws a monkey wrench into their plans. If Canada were to say no, a lot of other countries in the world would look at it and say, well, if the Yanks can't even get them on board, that means this is not going to fly. Where is the damn media in this country? Why is the media acting like bulletin boards for government statements, which is just as bad as what we do in the United States? It's part of the problem here is that, you know, we're all individuals who are basically talking to each other, but we're getting frozen out by the system of what constitutes a real issue. And I don't know if anybody has a good answer for this, because I know that not only my own messages, but many of the people in this room sent things to people in the media and say, look, Canada's sovereignty, billions and billions of dollars of Canadian wealth are at stake here, and you guys are not covering this story. By the way, there seems to be some kind of an odd pro-American bias, especially among conservative parties, or at least parties that carry a conservative label, that, oh, well, the Americans are good friends, et cetera, and, we really owe them a lot. I don't know what it is exactly, but we owe them a lot. And so we should go along with this, even when the thing you're going along with, it's not conservative, it's not progressive, it's just dumb. Is that the way a friend behaves? I mean, if I'm drunk and I say, hey, let's get in the car and go somewhere, does a friend jump in the car for a joyride, or does he take my keys away? A real friend says no under some circumstances. So I'm asking, as a Yank, I guess I'm not exactly a Yank, I live in Virginia.
So that's my story of why I relinquished my United States citizenship. I have to say that one of my motivating factors is the protection of my family. I mean, I have my wife, Kathy, and 4 cats. We don't have any children, but still, that's family. And my wife is the owner of a Canadian company. They overhaul wheels and brakes and airplane propellers, and she employs, along with her brothers and her parents, over 30 Canadians. And I don't understand why a Canadian employer should be exposed to taxes from a foreign country. So in order to protect my wife, I had to relinquish my birthright. You realize it's a birthright. If you're born in a country, you have a right to live there. Okay, but because of the stupid idiots in Washington, I had to give up my birthright. Okay, that makes me angry. Okay, that makes me very angry. But, okay. I accept it. I love Canada. I'll fight for Canada. I'll defend Canada. If any Americans try to cross the border this time, or 2012, I'll be there. So potentially you could owe up to 300% of your financial wealth to the United States Treasury in willful foreign bank account report fines. And let me tell you something, I am in willful non-compliance.